My neighbor Wendy is here, who has a business, Star Associates. Wendy, thanks for joining the call. All right, I'm going to get us started. It is my honor to be here to introduce you to my friend and colleague Dana Conway, who teaches in Certificate in Executive Management. My name is Vicki Maris. I'm an assistant director at the Stair Center for Executive Education. And the Stair Center is part of the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame. We have put this webinar series together for you to bring some of our instructors who teach in the certificate program and also a couple of our other programs who teach in topic areas that we thought you all might find really helpful during this time of crisis. And I'm going to Dana, I'll do a little bit more intro of you in just a moment. I also want to introduce my fellow staff member, colleague at the Stair Center, Kalinda Hamilton. Thank you, Kalinda, for being here. Kalinda has volunteered to help me out with this webinar series, and she also is working remotely right now. And both of us will be watching the chat for your questions and comments as Dana is teaching and facilitating. So feel free to go ahead and type your comments and questions in. I would like to invite you, if this topic is of interest and if you have some time tomorrow, we're going to take a deeper dive into this topic of emotional intelligence at 4 o'clock in a Zoom video chat, so kind of a regular Zoom call. And Dana will lead that conversation. It'll be a more informal type of gathering, kind of a roundtable discussion. And if you don't get your question answered or your comment addressed, I would really encourage you to come tomorrow to that 4 o'clock call. That could be a place where we can get to more of the comments and questions. And all of these are free. They're open to the public. It's our way of trying to serve you in this time of crisis and to provide you with an additional resource. As I have been doing for each of these webinars, I have been opening our list of people who have registered for the webinar, and I've been speaking each one of your names out loud just before we get started and saying a prayer over each one of you and your efforts in this topic area of emotional intelligence and what you're doing as a lifelong learner. That is such an important aspect of being a leader, and we at the University of Notre Dame, and especially my colleagues here in the Stair Center and our staff and faculty, we commend you for taking that step and making that commitment to your lifelong learning. I have a slide here that will show you some of the programs that we have coming up.
I apologize for my navigation of the slides.
Hey, that's okay. There it is, the slide with these are the programs coming in the fall. As you know, all of us have had to be flexible with scheduling and rescheduling. This is our list as it stands at the moment. There is a possibility that some things might change depending on what changes as far as state orders and university decisions. But right now we're moving forward with our plan for these programs to be on the campus. A few of you have asked me that question. And I'm not going to turn this webinar into a promotional event, but I did want to provide this so you could see what we have coming. Dana teaches in Module 4 of Certificate in Executive Management. You'll see that over there in the second column. That's November 3rd through the 5th. Kalinda and I have had the privilege, and I know several of you on this call, because as I was reading your names, I see some alumni of our program, and so there are several of us here, Dana, who have been in the classroom with you. We have had the privilege to hear her talk about creating accountability and dealing with difficult conversations. We do a really interesting assessment on productive conflict, and I've watched Dana lead a conversation or facilitate a discussion about that particular topic. Dana is a master facilitator, has many certifications. She does executive coaching. She works out of the Indianapolis area. I think several of her clients are in the Indianapolis, Indiana area. We are honored that she teaches in our programs at the University of Notre Dame, both in the Stair Center and also for the Department of Human Resources for the university, which I believe that's what you were doing earlier today, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So Dana, with that, I would love to turn this over to you. And we are so glad you are here today. The topic, emotional intelligence during crisis.
All right. Thank you, Vicki. It's always embarrassing getting the introduction, so my emotions don't handle it so well, but I appreciate a nice introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to get to talk about this topic. What's true is that we are each hardwired to experience emotions throughout each and every day. And then how we process these emotions and manage our reactions, that's really the core of our emotional intelligence. I know when I first heard the topic emotional intelligence, I got super excited because I had always been told I was such an emotional child. And kind of felt like, what's wrong with me? So I loved when I heard about the topic several years ago, and then I became certified and started researching and studying along with the other topics that Vicki had mentioned, just to help people in the workplace, because to me, these are all things that are fixable, if you will. I think that we don't give enough attention to these topics necessarily, especially, when we're in grade school and high school and all that. Those aren't like the names of classes that we go through, but yet these are important skills to have to be successful in the workplace. So I feel very fortunate that I get to teach on these topics. And then of course, practicing it every day, just living, right? So, when we do this really well, practice these skills, life is better. And when we don't have good emotional intelligence, we struggle in a number of ways. So when Vicki first invited me to speak on this topic, we were into COVID-19, this pandemic crisis. And we were kind of far enough into it that we were even talking about it's, kind of people were adjusting more to it. Like we were getting used to working from home, wearing masks, social distancing. I guess if you can get used to all of that. But we were kind of more into it, but yet still, kind of in crisis mode. And then more recently, now we've been experiencing a different kind of crisis and the ripple effects, as a result of the tragic killing of George Floyd. And so that has been a lot of conversation I've had with clients over the last couple of weeks around that, and just a new awareness of how we can use our empathy skills, which is an emotional intelligence skill, to help others that are really struggling through this. So I think it's wise to not only think about ourselves and the emotions that we're experiencing, but then of course the emotions of others and how we can help each other all along. And then just trying to figure out, what's next? Where do we go from here? So again, emotions are playing out in our lives every single moment of the day. And we're probably all having a lot of conversations in our heads, hopefully with others too. So anyway, we're going to talk about emotions and specifically emotional intelligence during crisis. Okay, so what I want to cover today in our kind of short amount of time, and I have to really watch time because I could go on and on and on about some of this, and it's hard to condense it because it's such a broad topic. But we do want to talk about how our emotions work for us or against us, and just what is it? What is it that emotional intelligence is? What is it? How does our emotion work in our bodies, and the ripple effects of that? And then talk about the 15 emotional intelligence factors, which I've got it shortened to EQ. So sometimes we call it EQ, sometimes we call it EI, sometimes we title it emotional intelligence, but you'll see it one of those two or one of those three versions in my presentation. And then we'll talk about specifically some emotional intelligence skills that pertain to crisis, and that would be developing first emotional awareness, and then managing stress and anxiety, developing empathy, and then just ongoing managing your reactions. And of course, we'll end with some time to answer questions and provide additional resources for you. And then tomorrow, as Vicki said, we're going to have another hour discussion. And the only thing I'm going to ask of Vicki is that she makes sure that one of her llamas appear into the discussion tomorrow. So if she hasn't told you, she's got a llama farm, and I love seeing the llamas. So they have emotions too.
I might be able to make that happen.
That'd be awesome. Okay, so let's talk about defining emotional intelligence. So there's been lots of research done, really what I consider more recent years because I'm old. But in 1980, a psychologist, Dr. Reuven Bar-On, asked, is it beyond IQ which helps people to succeed? And I always think about, if you think about people that have been most successful, they aren't always necessarily the smartest people, but they are the people that know how to work through situations with people. They've got good people skills. And so he took on a 17-year research program, and through that process, he identified the 15 factors that help people to become successful. And then another notable psychologist, which you've probably all heard of, is Daniel Goleman, and he's written many, many books on this topic. So there's a lot of resources available to talk that goes deeper into emotional intelligence. And as I said, I'll share some of those at the end of this presentation. And probably, Vicki, I'm going to add a few more because I think of things at the last minute. I'm going to add more to the slides before I send them to you to send off to people.
That would be great. Thank you.
You're welcome. So by definition, emotional intelligence is a set of emotional and social skills that collectively establish how well we perceive and express ourselves, develop and maintain social relationships, cope with challenges, and then use emotional information in an effective and meaningful way. So let's talk a little bit more about how it all works. So here you can see is a brain. So to understand EQ, it's important to understand a little bit about how our brain works. So the physical pathway for emotional intelligence starts in our brain at the spinal cord. And your primary senses, everything you see, hear, taste, touch, travels through your body and enters here. And then it must travel to the front of your brain before you can think rationally about your experience. So everything you're experiencing first, it's going to travel through that limbic system, which is right in here. And this journey ensures that you experience things emotionally before your reason kicks into gear. And this is important because there's times where we need to have these reactions that protect us. So it would make us, that fight or flee type response. What's happening so quickly is that the emotional side of your brain and the rational side of your brain, they're talking to each other, and there's back and forth communication going on. So that's really the physical source of emotional intelligence. So what's important to understand is that no matter what, we're all emotional creatures. That's how we're wired. We will experience emotions, and your first reaction to an event is always going to be an emotional one, and you don't have any control over that. But you do have control over the thoughts that you have behind emotions, and then you also have control over the feeling that comes after that, and you certainly have control over your reaction or your behavior that comes after that. But to be able to be effective in that, you have to also be fully aware of what you're experiencing. So just even by talking about it, you may have already known some of this, but it's always a good reminder that that's just how we're wired and how our body works. So emotional intelligence requires effective communication between the rational and emotional centers of the brain, and then also having the thought process that comes behind it and working on the outcomes that come from what we're experiencing. So in other words, if you know this part, then you can change the way you feel, think, and act, and stop that maybe immediate reaction. And when I say reaction, I'm not just talking about outward, it can be inward too, because for sure, I can tell you if I have something that triggers something for me, I will stop breathing and have that kind of physical stress, which I'm pretty sure my brain needs oxygen. And blood flow and all those good things. So I know for myself, it's important to remember, okay, I'm having the emotion. I need to recognize that and work through what does this mean to help me to live further. Okay, so let's talk about emotions and feelings. So you can see listed here, primary emotions are listed on the left-hand side and feelings are listed on the right. So many times, or many people use the terms feeling and emotion as synonyms, but they are not the same. While they have similar elements, there is a difference. So it's really confusing because even as I do research, even people that are well studied on this will kind of interchange a lot to where it makes it really confusing. So what I want you to remember is emotions are your physical responses. So they're instinctive, which means they are triggered like your reflexes, and you don't do anything to bring them about. They are just, they're hardwired. So when you think about this, I think the easiest way to think about and remember it is picture how a baby reacts to different situations before they can ever even talk. I mean, you can just picture a baby's face, you know, if they're in fear or if they're surprised or they're sad or they're joy, anger, disgust, interest, shame. I mean, you can picture all that, and that's before they're really able to express, you know, the feelings that they're experiencing. So hopefully that helps you with the memory of knowing that you're going to have those emotions first, and it's something that just happens that is not controllable. The good news is that we have those emotions because they can help us to act, you know, if we were in danger, like defend ourselves if we were threatened, or cry if we're sad, or laugh when we're happy. So they are a good thing. It's funny, it feels like emotions have gotten a bad rap, right? But we all have them, and it's all good. It's good that we have them. So feelings, on the other hand, they happen after our thoughts have created an interpretation of the emotion that we experience. So the feelings actually describe our emotions. And emotional responses are biological based and more instinctual. So there isn't much variation from person to person, but with feelings, results can vary greatly because individuals each have made unique associations. They have memories, you have memories, beliefs, culture plays into it, and previous traumatic experiences play into it. And I think that's something important for us to recognize too, because just because someone else reacts to something differently than us doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. You know, there could be a lot going on that we don't know that they're experiencing and why they're having the reaction that they're having. So we'll talk about that more when we talk about empathy. Okay, so why is this important to know? It's because then when you take the time to observe what your emotions feel like, and you're then able to describe your feelings in detail, you can really take a step back when you're in a crisis situation or when it feels like you're in the middle of chaos or panic. And then you can, you know, sort through what you're experiencing and really start thinking through and clarifying what it is you need to do to move forward. And then if we understand those different nuances, we can use our knowledge better to serve us better. And that way, the thought is we'll have a more positive outcome or a more productive outcome or reaction to situations, and ultimately create more positive change in our lives. So let me give you another visual. So here's how it works. You have, you know, the event happens and you unconsciously experience the emotion. Then you have this automatic thought, which then triggers the feeling, and then the feeling generates a reaction or behavior. So to give you an example, a workplace example, let's say a big project is dumped on you unexpectedly and you already have a full plate. So your initial emotional response might be fear, and you wouldn't even use those words probably to describe it, but that might be the initial emotion that you're having. Your automatic thought is, I'm going to fail. I'm going to let people down, something like that. But through your processing, then you can choose what you decide to focus on. So it depends. I mean, some of us may immediately react with something negative, or if we're using our emotional intelligence, our good emotional intelligence, we might process through and get through those initial feelings of all those, I'm going to fail, to no, I'm not going to fail, I've done this before, okay, I can figure this out. And then making the choice to maybe focus more on what the positive outcome is going to be from this project. Like, how are my my customers or my team, how are they going to benefit once we get this project done? So choosing to feel optimistic about it and excited instead of feeling fear and dread. And when you change your thoughts and feelings about a situation, then it changes your reaction and then your behavior. So that's the idea behind that. So by becoming aware of your emotions and feelings, the feelings that happens, then you can choose to be intentional about managing your thoughts, feelings, and reactions, so that no matter what you're experiencing, you can maintain an emotionally intelligent balance and clarity of thought, and then gain a sense of inner peace. Now, I caution you on this because I feel like because I study this so much and I teach it, that I have this responsibility in situations, and sometimes I won't assert myself because I think I just have to keep this pleasant inner peace. So there's times where I should probably assert myself more and deal with the matter at hand, because what I'm experiencing, let's just say, for example, I'm having a situation where, whatever somebody's saying truly is just off and it needs to be addressed. And so you have that choice. I may choose to walk away from it and not deal with it, or maybe the better choice is I choose to confront it in a peaceful way and, call out the person, if you will, but do it in a way that's respectful and with, giving that person dignity. So what I'm saying is we want to use our emotions wisely and, but not try to be so contained that we're not expressing things when they need to be expressed. Okay, so I want to show you this model. I use an assessment. It's called the EQI 2.0, and it is, there's a lot of assessments out there. I particularly like this one because the reports that I can gain from it are extremely helpful, because they have true strategies and action planning and that type of thing. And this is what I mentioned earlier. Dr. Reuven Burn discovered the 15 factors that help people become successful. That's what this model is for, and identifying those skills. And so the assessment itself will measure how well you apply that emotional intelligence skill to your workplace. And I'm not necessarily promoting assessment to you, but I wanted you to be aware of it because I'm going to refer to this model as we're talking because of the emotional intelligence skills. But at the end of the presentation, when I provide resources to you, I will point you to, if you want to take that assessment, how you can do that. And like I said, there's other assessments out there, and I really feel like any kind of study or assessment on emotional intelligence is only going to help people get better. So it's not necessary to pick one over the other. Okay, so here's a better visual, I think, to kind of see what this is the same information that was on the model I just showed you. That's just their pretty one. So when you look at this list of skills, one thing I want to point out is that we can use skills together, and that can be negative or it can be positive. And these are all skills that we can all work on, whether you even take an assessment, just seeing what they are, having that knowledge and realization of the importance of working on each of these emotional intelligence skills. So when you think about what could happen, for example, and I have no problem always telling on myself because that's an easy thing for me to do. But I can tell you, I said earlier, I was always, described as being emotional. So I realized in the past several years, I have a very strong emotional awareness. Well, I also had very strong emotional expression. So in my mind, that was a good thing until I had a introverted colleague who did not have that. And what I found myself doing, I also have a lower impulse control and lower independence. So when I'm having an emotional experience, my go-to was to go find my nearest friend and basically spill out my emotions all over them. So if you picture a quiet, introverted person who doesn't do that and they've got to deal with me, literally I could watch his body language and know that I was oversharing. I learned through taking the assessment myself that these were areas I need to work on. So I've since improved on all those areas. Have I perfected it? Nope. I just asked my family. But I know that when I want to work on it, I can totally work on all of that and make sure that I'm handling myself in the right way. Because what I also know that if I continued to act like that, I would affect my interpersonal relationships, one, and also affect my credibility with people because it just wouldn't look right. So I have to work on that. Now, conversely, if I'm skilled with, let's say, stress tolerance, empathy, and problem solving, which I'm sure some of you have those and are good with all those skills, then I might be a highly effective leader. And during crisis situations, I might be the one that is the go-to leader that has the ability to help others who are really struggling with their own emotions. So the key is balancing and leveraging all of your skills as much as you possibly can. But I've yet to see any report, and I've been using this report for about 6 years now, 7 years. I've yet to see anyone have all these skills mastered. So the point is we're all a work in progress. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second and see what questions we might have before we move on to talking about some skills.
Dana, I have one for you while we're waiting to see if anyone would like to type something into the chat. During a time of major crisis, like we have all been experiencing, I've heard some people that we've been listening to in fireside chats and various venues for learning describe how most of us are experiencing like an influx of extra emotion and the feelings that come from that. But as leaders, that it's also good to be vulnerable, to show some vulnerability.
Yes.
When you add to that the length of this crisis, and it seems like the types of uncertainty going with it change almost weekly. Do you think that there's any I don't know, like people holding in their emotions, even though they know they feel like they should be vulnerable, like they know that from the instructions they've received?
Yeah, I would totally think that people are doing that because they think that's appropriate and they've learned that possibly in some way. And there are truly some people that just aren't comfortable sharing, you know, even with their closest intimate relationships, they may not be comfortable doing that. But I do believe there's value in sharing because of that vulnerability and that, you know, what I was teaching earlier were the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. And the foundational behaviors is trust. And so people trust people more when they feel like they're being authentic and vulnerable and can share, because we're all human beings. Mm-hmm. So I do think there's high value in sharing. And I think sometimes the fear of what that means once you do share, I would hope people can work on getting over that, because just because you share it once doesn't mean now everybody's going to expect you to do it every day. You know, yeah. You have control over that. So
yes, I see we have a question that's been typed in. Kevin is asking if you would speak to how this changes over time with age.
Okay, good. That's interesting because I do believe that people, well, first of all, emotional intelligence definitely is what you can grow and learn. It doesn't matter what age you are, if you choose to. I've seen older people not have good emotional intelligence skills, and I've seen young people have great emotional intelligence skills. So I think when the change happens is when people put intention to it. And I definitely think our experiences change us too. I mean, I say now I have 2 teenagers, and I already know that by the time I'm a grandparent, I'm going to have a whole different way of operating with grandkids versus how I was with my own kids when it comes to emotions. So I do think that those that are capable and willing to learn can grow in this area. So I think, again, I just think it takes intention and the interest of wanting to.
Yes, thank you. Dana, I'll throw in one more question here, and folks, please do keep typing your questions as you have them, and we'll either cover them here or we'll bring them into the call tomorrow, the Zoom call. Wendy is asking, would you suggest an emotional intelligence assessment over a personality assessment for businesses to use for employee selection?
That is a deep question. So I use the Myers-Briggs. I'm a Myers-Briggs practitioner and also use DISC. When it comes to employee selection, you have to be careful because you cannot use those types of assessments because coming from an SBHR background, you can't necessarily use those to select people. You can ask questions that would help get to the information you're looking for, but the assessments for selection, I would caution you on that. Now, between the assessments, I find high value in both because they're 2 different things. Emotional intelligence is something different than personality differences, but yet they can work together, and they overlap each other, but they're still distinctly different. And as far as staff development and leadership development, all that, I recommend doing both. Team development, all of it. So, but back on the hiring, I would say I would try to ask behavioral type questions to get to whatever it is that you're looking for when you're making hiring decisions.
Thank you. Would you like to take another question now, or would you like to go on with content and then we'll bring up more questions at the end?
You tell me. I'm not capturing all the questions, so if you think there's one that we could go ahead, it's up to you. I probably have about 10 more minutes of content, so I'm trying to watch our time too.
Yes. One of them I'm seeing here is just a simple question to will we be able to send the PowerPoint? So yes, if you are interested in the slides, if you give us your email here in the chat, we can do that. Mm-hmm. And let's see. Jose Luis asked, sometimes as leaders we contain emotions. Let me put different emphasis on that. Sometimes as leaders we contain emotions in order to show a positive environment. What kind of techniques are commonly used to release them?
So, I think using your instincts. So for example, and I totally understand that way of thinking, but if there's an obvious crisis going on, I'll use this as an example. Okay, so with the George Floyd killing, when I've talked to friends and colleagues, and those specifically that are African American, what I hear is frustration when they don't have leadership sharing, what's happening in our country. So what would quickly resolve that is showing the empathy towards that and sharing your own experience about it and having that conversation. So I guess what I'm saying is when there is something going on that's very obvious, whether it's big like that, or if it's just, in your particular organization or department or whatever, I think acknowledging whatever that thing is and sharing your own feeling about it, and then even, productively what you're doing about it. Because you want to keep it on that positive way of thinking, let them hear your thought process of what you're positively doing to address it for yourself. Does that help?
Yeah. Thank you, Dana. Thank you for asking the question, Jose Luis.
Yes, that's a great question.
Everybody who has already asked questions. We do have a couple more that I need to pull up the Q&A, but I would suggest, why don't you go ahead with the rest of your content, and I'll start reviewing what I might have missed.
Okay, sounds good. I love the engagement, so thank you all. Okay, so we're going to talk next about specific skills that you can easily develop to demonstrate emotional intelligence during crisis. So let's, back earlier I showed you kind of the flow of what happens. And, when we first experience an event that triggers our emotion, then the thought, then a feeling, which leads to a reaction. And sometimes it's good, sometimes not so good. So the key aspect of practicing emotional intelligence is pausing before reacting to allow the processing of our emotions, thoughts, and feelings so that we can have a more positive or productive reaction. So I want you to think about when you see this visual of just really letting this loop happen that's between emotion, thought, and feeling, and really kind of processing through, what you're experiencing, what does that mean, and really doing some self-talk to help you get through it before you respond. So there's a lot of different things that can happen during that time, but just even if we can pause for just a few seconds before we react. With impulse control being one of the emotional intelligence skills, allowing, not to be so quick to respond, or the need to defend, or, just have an answer, avoiding that when there's some heavy emotional things going on, and just allowing some time for that reflection before you respond. But the key is to respond, because sometimes we can be too slow to react too. Okay, so let's talk about first emotional self-awareness. So sometimes we like to avoid our emotions. And I think part of it is because sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it's easier. Sometimes we're afraid, to have that experience. Sometimes we don't have time to experience it. And we just don't maybe understand why, what's happening to us. And we're ashamed that we have the feeling that we're having. And so when we ignore or minimize, I said emotion, I said it wrong. When we ignore or minimize our feeling, no matter how small or insignificant, we're missing the opportunity to do something productive with that feeling. And even worse, ignoring your feelings doesn't make them go away. It just helps them to surface again when you least expect them. And I'm sure you've all had experiences where either you've witnessed it with someone else or you yourself have had that experience. So emotional self-awareness is the ability to recognize that we're responding emotionally and to label our emotions accurately. So since our emotion prioritizes our thoughts, emotional self-awareness helps us to know why we're thinking what we are. And when we recognize and understand our emotions and feelings, then we can plan out an effective response. So for example, and you can kind of fill in the blank of your thought process with what you're experiencing. So it really makes me feel whatever the emotion is or the feeling is. I'm going to use an example of, it really makes me feel angry when my colleague cuts me off in meetings. So, okay, I'm angry and I can get really angry about this, but is that, what am I really angry about? And if I really dive in and start asking myself some questions, why does that bother me? What's really going on here? is this something I can let go? Or maybe, you know, of course I'm bothered by this. That's completely normal. It's rude. So what can I do? Can I move on? Or is there something that I really need to do to help my colleague know that this is happening? And that would probably be the most constructive thing I could do. So what I bring that example up because as a coach, I will hear these types of things day in and day out from all different levels, but particularly high-level leaders, that you're really frustrated with situations that they're afraid to address it. And I think the other secondary emotion that happens is shame for feeling an emotion. And so I encourage all of you to realize that, again, it's normal to have these emotions and the feelings that go with it when things happen. But then what can we do to help us get through it and then determine truly what is the next best step? And maybe that next best step creates a new emotion, fear of losing my job, fear of creating a riff, you know, all those types of things. But first and foremost, just becoming aware of the emotion and accepting it versus trying to avoid it or, you know, brush it aside, because I don't think that that's effective. And then as I have on the slide, identify the emotions and feelings you're experiencing, explore that root, and then choosing a more effective response. And even if you made the choice to, in that example, I'm not going to do anything at this time, I'm going to pay attention to it to see if it happens again, that's still a productive choice that you're making versus ignoring or being angry or possibly being passive aggressive, you know, having these other destructive behaviors because that person should know they're doing that. Okay, so let's move on to managing your stress and anxiety. So earlier I was talking about pausing. And so when you can actually pause, and when we say pause, if ideally counting to 10, that seems like a long time when you're trying to do it. Let me tell you, even if you count to 3, that would be pausing. But truly, if you're having an emotional event, especially if it's high emotion, if you can just take a step back and take some deep breaths. There's one breathing technique is breathe in, counting to 4, and hold for 2 counts, and then breathe out, counting to 6. And I've had people tell me that they've used that technique when they start having anxiety, when they're trying to go to sleep at night, and it actually helps them to calm down and go back to sleep. And, you know, when I think about anxiety, I know probably all of us have experienced that at the beginning of the COVID crisis. I know I did. I couldn't, you know, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and couldn't sleep. So I would have to talk myself off the ledge of getting through that anxiety. So anyway, no matter what the crisis, using some of these techniques to get through the moment that you're experiencing it, breathing, taking a walk, you know, exercise releases the endorphins. And I do believe if you can even get up and move around, that shift of energy and movement can reframe our thoughts and help us to get through that extreme emotion we might be feeling. So taking that pause is the big thing, is pausing and taking a moment. And you know what, here's everything. If any of you have kids at home, these are great exercises to do with kids. Trust me, I have a teenager that I used this the other day, and I was just dumbfounded how well it worked. I should know. Okay, so self-coaching. I love self-coaching because we can all do that too, but asking yourself, you know, whatever it is you're experiencing, what are the facts? You know, what is the evidence? If there's something that I'm thinking that's just terrible is going to happen, what are the facts? What's the evidence? What's my interpretation? But what are some other ways to look at it? And sometimes talking to other people can help you with that too. But if you don't have another person, just really try to think, what are some other ways to look at a situation? Where do I need to focus my attention, and what can I do now? Sometimes I hear people so worried about the future and they're just consumed with it that it's creating all this stress and anxiety. And sometimes I do believe it's helpful to walk yourself through all the what ifs and all the way through. Like, okay, if that happens, then I would do this. If that happens, I would do this. And just knowing you would have that plan can help you get through the stress and anxiety at the moment. And of course, act on what needs to be acted on. Sometimes it's baby steps, sometimes it's bigger steps. But sometimes we are stopping ourselves because of the emotions we're experiencing from even acting on something. So even if it's a baby step that is taking care of whatever it needs to be taken care of, that can help. And then of course, taking care of yourself. So I know we hear this all the time, but I don't believe we all practice good rest, relaxation, nutrition, work-life balance, and exercise. And I can't stress that enough. And I have to practice what I preach, by the way. But all of those areas, they're just so important. And, you know, I never thought nutrition was that important, but I've come to realize that I don't do well with sugar and carbs. Like that definitely affects my stress level. So paying attention to your body. Okay, I'm gonna get to the next one. I see we're out of time. I knew I could go on and on. Okay, developing empathy. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier when we were talking about, you know, working with people that might be struggling now with the racial tensions and, you know, what this means. So empathy is the ability to read others well and care about their thoughts and feelings. Empathy is not sympathy, and they both empathy and sympathy involve interest in someone's feelings, but sympathy implies two things that empathy is not. First, that we agree with their position rather than we understand their position. And two, that we feel sorry for them, which could be insulting to someone. So the importance of empathy is, if you really want to get, let's just say you're working as a leader with a team and you're trying to get them to where you want them to go, you have to know where they're starting from, what they're experiencing, and meet them where they're at. Because without that, if they're going through something, they're not going to go with you with whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So for example, if you say let's say you're getting ready to go through a big change, which I feel like I hear change all the time. But if you've got staff members, let's just say they are just fear, you know, and have anxiety over what the big change means. And it's interesting, higher level leaders know intuitively, like, this is not going to affect these people negatively, but these people don't know that. And we think they should know it, but they may not have been in all the conversations we've been in. And no matter what, they've got these fears because other things are playing into their mind about it. So simple things like just paying attention to body language and checking in, you know, how are you doing? You know, if you see body language that looks like someone's concerned, taking the time to ask, you know, and acknowledging that they look concerned. And maybe it's a misread, but asking if they are. And then when people are sharing their perspectives, as I show on the slide, that last bullet, you don't have to agree with it, but just by acknowledging it, it sounds like you feel worried because what this change might mean. Is that right? And then they're going to correct you or they're going to talk more about it. But all of that is showing empathy and care. And the big part of this too is being fully present and fully listening, not just listening to respond to whatever it is they're saying or getting on the defense, but really hearing them out. That goes a long way. Okay, real quick. Our last area is managing, you know what, I didn't go to this slide and I'm sorry.
I was looking for a place to interject that looked like maybe time for another slide.
Look at this slide. I got two screens going and I'm not that talented. So you can see developing empathy, anticipate and respond to others' needs, be attentive to others' emotional cues, verbal and nonverbal, listen openly with an intention to understand, and show sensitivity to others' perspectives. Okay, I apologize for that. Let's go to the next one. Okay, managing your reactions. So a good way to work on managing your reactions is also to reflect on your past behaviors. Realizing that our emotions, they really can be powerful weapons. And so just recognizing that everything we do has a ripple effect, especially as leaders. So if you really want to focus working on this, think about a recent situation where you had a negative or non-productive reaction, and that could, be an internal one or external. But think about through what was your initial interpretation of the situation, and then how did that initial interpretation affect your reaction or how you behaved. Then go back and think of the same situation and think of a time, or this time think of if you had a different interpretation, more a positive interpretation of the event or more productive, and then how could you have reacted more constructively. And so the key is having a plan for the next time something happens, and then using the pause the next time your emotions hijack your rational thought process. So all this can happen. It takes practice to do it, but I do believe having a plan, even thinking about who pushes your hot buttons, what situations push your hot buttons, and the responses that you have that you don't like about yourself. So envision that happening, and then what would be a more productive way to respond. And then the next time that happens, you're more likely that you'll actually respond more productively. So I'll end with recognizing that we all have 3 certainties: that we are all human beings, we all have choices, we all have emotions. There's consequences to all the choices that we make. So using emotional intelligence will not only help you have a more satisfying life, but also it gives you this incredible opportunity to lead others in a way that they will perform at a higher level at work and also in their homes and other parts of their lives. So really, you can create a positive ripple effect on everyone you touch when you're practicing using good emotional intelligence. All right, I'm going to point you to the resources and we can answer some more questions. I'm going to add a couple to this, but the assessment I told you about is the Emotional Quotient Inventory 2.0 and Multi-Health Systems Inc. And you can actually go to their site to see more about that. It's MHI. I'll put that in my slide.
Is that another slide?
Oh gosh, thank you. I swear I wasn't going to let that happen again. Anyway, I'm going to add to this slide the website for Multi-Health. And I'm happy to help you with that as well. You would reach out to Vicki if you need anything from me or have more questions for me, or you'd like to chat with me. Just reach out to Vicki and she can connect us. And then the 2 books that I really like are the EQ Edge and the EQ Leader. There's other ones that are also good. There's a couple others I'm going to add, one by Daniel Goleman, and then another one you may have all seen, the Emotional, sorry, I got to reach and get it. Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And this one is just a short book that also has an assessment in it. So I think this is a good book to use too. So I'm going to add that to the resources. Okay, now I'm ready for more questions. In the 5 minutes we have left.
Kitty has asked a question. What do you recommend when interacting with people who lack empathy and don't appear to be concerned about working on their capacity to feel or understand others' perspectives?
Well, I would say it depends on, first of all, I always recommend conversations. And, you can use this webinar as a springboard for the conversation. And say, I just went through this webinar and we were talking specifically about this, and get their, take on it, get the conversation going. It's hard to say, I would want to know more about maybe what's behind it. If there's someone that reports you, then definitely that could be a development area that you could work with, making sure that they they get trained up on that, because sometimes, there's people that, first of all, the empathy, it's one of those things, you can fake it till you make it. And I don't mean that to be, non-authentic, but it is hard for some people to show it. But I think if we can show them the importance of it, because that's valid. People need to be, feel that people care about them and have that, especially if they're a leader. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Dana. I'm seeing a comment here from Cindy. She has shared, I think pausing briefly to refocus or check that I have the correct focus is very beneficial to both me and those I am working with.
Good point. Yeah, for those that you're working with too, when you're having that experience. Very good point.
A question from Kevin. How is emotional intelligence different and more important, etc., in this virtual world we're all living in right now?
Oh, good question. So I think that from what I'm hearing from different clients, it seems that there's an issue with Zoom meetings. So meaning, it sounds like from what I'm hearing, people are not having enough interactions to build that connectivity and engagement and human relationship because they're only doing Zoom meetings. And so what I keep encouraging everyone is to have Zoom meetings just to be, not necessarily an agenda. Or the agenda is, let's talk about how we're going to work together more and what are some of the issues. So it's very important with the virtual, because we're just losing some of that. And I know, some of the challenges are there's people that are that live alone, and then they don't necessarily have as much of that human interaction to, bounce things off of another person, and it's really affecting them. They were more dependent on the face-to-face. So I do believe it's, no matter what we're experiencing, it's going to be important. But with the virtual, I think it needs to be more intentional about making sure that people have the skills, that you're talking about it, and that we're demonstrating and modeling it, and yeah.
Just a comment on that, Dana. I'm sure many of you here on the call have also heard that phrase of screen fatigue and Zoom fatigue, that it's a real thing. I have noticed that it's, just for me personally, you find you don't want to intrude on people's schedules by scheduling a Zoom call just to chat. But yet, as you mentioned, all of us, I think, are really missing those hallway conversations or the just outside the cubicle conversation. There's a lot of work that, not just work, but the social aspect of it that happens in those unplanned moments.
I would encourage people to ask for those meetings and just be the one that does it, because I just keep hearing it. So it may be everyone's, no one is, not one person is brave enough to suggest it. Maybe people are embarrassed by that, their need for that.
Yeah, it could be. We've reached the 2 o'clock point, so we have gone an hour. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I'm also doing a last scroll here through the chat to see if we have missed something. Folks, I did place the link to the meeting tomorrow, the Zoom call at 4 o'clock, and that is the more informal conversation, and most people will be joining that call on camera. It's not a requirement that you be on camera, but I just want to share that up front so that you would know it's a different format of a call than the webinar we're on right now. And we certainly can address questions that maybe didn't get covered here. We have a few people that are using the webinars and the Zoom calls, the combination of those two things, as a way to complete one of the modules in certificate in executive management that would have occurred back in March if we had been on our typical schedule. And so we do have a few people that have been participating in the calls for that purpose, but also we've had several guests who've joined us. So you do not have to be enrolled in the program. You simply just would need to be interested in this topic, and we'll spend another hour discussing it further with Dana. Dana, thank you very much for taking the time to prepare for this and to share your knowledge and wisdom on this subject. On behalf of everybody here on the call and our team at the STAIR Center and in the Mendoza College of Business, we appreciate you.
Truly my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity, and I wish everyone all the best. I hope to get to talk to people, all of you, tomorrow too.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. We are going to sign off, and I hope to see you tomorrow. If you didn't catch the link to the meeting tomorrow that's in the chat, send me an email, and I'd be happy to send it to you that way as well. Take care. Bye.
Bye.